So I wanted to talk about the Jackrabbit situation, and to make it a little bit more interesting, I was going to do it while I was doing my hormone replacement therapy injection, because why not? I want to. So there we go. Jackrabbit joined the SCP Wiki in November of 2021. Not take her any time at all to establish a presence in the community, much like it has taken me no time at all to discover that I do not actually have everything that I needed before I sat down and started recording, because I am a consummate professional. Jackrabbit ingratiated herself with the core creative group of the SCP Wiki by interacting with them on social media, specifically on Twitter. As SCP has become, there aren't exactly a lot of people who are really interacting with the core community. It's mostly just authors talking to other authors. So for someone to come in from the outside and seem to have this deep knowledge and appreciation of the community like they did, it's like, oh, this is a new outside person who has something in common with me. A new friend, hello. Her unraveling began recently. You know, this beloved figure, author, commentator, podcaster on the Simply Creative podcast and other places recently. She did a thing. I can't believe she was with Gears, of all people. She had a conflict recently with Grigory Karpin, who I knew for many years is a good, upstanding person as far as I'm aware, has never stolen a freight train. He has recently banned abuser Dr. Bright about using the legacy of using his character, which I personally, a little editorializing, am not in favor of, but we can save that discussion for another time. Always properly dispose of your sharps in a hard plastic container, or else I'm going to do the actual injection off camera because I don't know what the policy on this website is for doing stuff like that. And I also don't want to gross anybody out. Right, anyways, where was I? She got into this argument and really started to get everybody in the core SCP community to turn against Gregory, spreading rumors that he was an abuser. And it got to the point where personality conflict, and she's going around telling people that he's an abuser, that he's bad, and people are not talking to him anymore. They're kicking him out of their private Discord servers, you know, people who he's friends with, and community spaces he's been allowed in, he's being removed from, and no one's telling him why. You know, that's got to be a disorienting experience. You just, people who were your friends one day just suddenly turning on you. Luckily, Gregory had enough friends who didn't turn on him and enough people who were like, this doesn't seem right, that there was a second look, and it turned out that this wasn't the first time that Jackrabbit had done something like this, that in fact she was a serial community abuser who had been going from place to place. She enjoys the attention and power you get from nestling yourself in from the close core of a community like that. How did someone in just a few months, just from November to June, so just a little over 6 months, go from being totally unknown to being someone who had been cavorting with the highest levels of the SCP elite community, only to turn out to be a lying, abusive turncoat who had been dishonest about everything they'd ever told anyone about themselves? You know, it makes me think of my own departure from the SCP Foundation community. Certainly, I wasn't coming in just with the express purpose of seeking power, but that's kind of where my engagement with the community ended up being, that the only thing that I personally cared about was collecting and soliciting more of that power. So I can understand that impulse that someone might have, but at the same time, to be coming into it purely with that motive of greed, to not ever have any sincere or genuine friendships like I remember having with so many people who unfortunately no longer. Anyways, this isn't about me, this is about Jackrabbit. So Jackrabbit, the SCP Wiki has a problem with personalities. It's got the susceptibility for what's basically a personality cult to spring up in the middle of its community and to be used to ostracize other people from the community. She was able to put together a $6,000 fundraiser for a member of the community who had been displaced by the war in Ukraine, and thankfully all that money did in fact go to her, but not all the money that she being Jackrabbit, what got from the community was refunded. She had a Ko-Fi and a Patreon where she did take donations and actually made a couple $100s, so this was a moderately profitable grift if you think that 191 days work for a couple $100 is worthwhile. Jackrabbit obviously did her homework before she started to mess with the SCP community, because she knew who the people to target were and she targeted them effectively, going after their works and praising them and engaging with them consistently on social media in a way that I think a lot of people are starved for, to feel like they're, part of something. I found it interesting that there were a lot of parallels to the Bright case, and how it's similar and how it's also different. Bright was a homegrown case, whereas Jackrabbit was someone who came from the outside with bad intentions and then came in and exercised those bad intentions. Jackrabbit's situation also began to unravel as an indirect consequence of Bright being banned, and this time, having learned possibly from their previous mistakes with Bright, staff were quick to remove someone as soon as it became clear that they were an abuser and not someone to keep around in the community. Flattery can still really get you anywhere in SCP if you make the right people feel that you're a cool person, and it only takes the only easiest way to make someone think that you're cool is tell them that they're cool, and that's exactly what Jackrabbit did. She said, "Oh, you're such a cool Mr. SCP writer. Please, just let me collaborate with you on this podcast." Well, it's a rug pull right now for the SCP community for someone that they all came to trust to turn out to be not who she seemed. And that can compare to Bright, where everyone kind of knew what was going on beforehand, and then they just kind of waited for someone to really prove it before they did anything about it. And what does it say about the SCP community that it was able to be taken in so easily by a grifter, a con artist, someone who just got off on lies? I don't know, man. It's kind of fucked up. But what are you gonna do? Shit happens. It's life. Later.